everyone, I'm Rebecca and welcome back to my sewing room. So this week, before I move on to a brand new project, I want to actually take the time to finish my last project. If you did not see the other videos on this project, I think there are 4 of them so far, but I have been making this 1874 bustle gown, and I wore it in Port Townsend last weekend. That was the last video that I put out, was my trip to the Victorian Festival in Port Townsend last week, and I wore it and it was great and I loved it, but it's not actually done. I didn't have enough time to get it finished to the point where I want it to be. It was finished wearable, it looked good, but it's not done. So this week, before I put away all of the fabrics for this project that are still all over this sewing room, I want to actually use them to finish the project. I know, I'm being responsible. What is this? So let's talk about where we are at and what all still needs to actually happen on this project. I have the bodice right here, and for the bodice there's like 2 things here that really need to happen. We are missing pretty much all of the trims on the sleeves. So on these sleeves we have to put on 1 tier of bias bound ruffles plus another double-sided tier of ruffles, and then we have to go over that with a strip of bias tape. And there's going to be a little button on the edge of the bias tape as well, because we can see that little button right here if we look really closely. The other thing that the bodice is lacking right now are the decorative pockets. There are supposed to be decorative pockets on these little tabby bits right here, presumably on both sides, because I feel like it would be weird to have it on just one side. This is the 1870s after all, and the 1870s really liked symmetry. So we are going to put little decorative pockets on each of these side areas here. And once we get the sleeve trim done and the pockets done, the bodice will be done. But that is not everything that has to happen on this project, because we are also lacking some trimming on the overskirt. Now, for one thing, the bows are just kind of lackluster. They lack luster, to quote from Curtains, the musical. And also they're just pinned on to the skirt right now. And in fact, this pin in particular bent itself out of shape twice during the weekend and the bow came off. So I'm actually torn on whether I want to leave them pinned on or not, to be honest, because I think I'm going to take this with me to Ireland this summer, and the bows are by far the bulkiest and heaviest part of this entire costume. Like, they are literally weighing this down, whereas otherwise it would be super, super lightweight. And for packing's sake, I want to have the option to potentially have those separate, or maybe even leave them off entirely, but I'm hoping just to be able to pack them separately. But I also want to zhuzh them a little so they're not so floppy and droopy. So I'm actually going to experiment with adding horsehair braid, like modern horsehair braid, within these bows, just to see if I can get them to stand up a little bit more. But we're also lacking some trims on the front of the skirt. Now, for sure, I am going to be adding the double-sided trim that's really similar to what's going on the sleeves all along the top of this ruffle right here. There should also be an entire other tier of the ruffle plus that double-sided trim that's a little bit higher up the skirt. But to be honest, I am not positive if I like that look. For one thing, the original plate is a solid purple as opposed to this purple plaid, and so I think that it kind of needs something to break it up, whereas I think the plaid gives enough visual interest that putting that additional one on there might really disrupt the line of the dress as opposed to add to the oomph of the dress. So it is possible that I'm not going to add that second tier of trim. I have already made the ruffled portion that I'm talking about that needs to get added, but I have not made the double-sided ruffle that goes there. So we're gonna make enough double-sided ruffle for the bottom and for the sleeves, and maybe we'll make a little bit extra to experiment with, but that is the trimming that is missing from this overskirt. So I think that will all be accomplishable in this week, and that way we can actually finish this off fully, and we'll see what the final look is like. But I wanted to take care of that before jumping into our next project, because we have some other really fun projects coming up very soon on this channel. So let's take one more week to finish off this bustle gown, and at the end I will show you the actual final reveal. And if, by the way, you missed any of those other videos and you want to revisit those first, I will have them linked right up here and of course also down below in the description. Let's dive into pleating and ruffling. So I already have the ruffle, the double-sided ruffle portions all cut out. I did that a few weeks ago, and I need to bias bind all of the edges, both edges, before we can ruffle and pleat, etc. That said, I've actually run out of bias again, but I have this much fabric left with which to make more bias. So hopefully this is going to be enough for the entire rest of the project. I do have some other smaller scrappy bits that would involve a lot more piecing of bias. So hopefully I can get it out of the big piece. And that should be all I need, because I think I already have enough of the 1 inch wider bias that's going to be top stitched. I should have enough of that already cut out and prepped. It's just the narrower 1.5 inch wide bias that's going to be going along the edges everywhere. So I'm gonna go grab my rotary cutter and cut out a whole bunch more strips of bias and bind all of the edges of this. And then these are actually pleated, not ruffled, but they are not stitched down on the edges like the existing trim was that we did several weeks ago on here. This is stitched at the edges, and because of that I did a different treatment here than just regular bias binding. We're just going to bias bind these so that I can stitch in the ditch on the machine and make that a little bit easier for me. And then I will go ahead and pleat all of this, just stitching down in the center of the strip so that the edges can kind of floof themselves back up, but the center can be nice and secured down underneath the bias strip that we will be hand top stitching to it. So the first thing that I've done is I have created 4 of these little sections right here. They were 21 inches long, and I think it's a French seam. It might be a felled seam. I can never remember which one is which, but it's the one where you put it wrong sides together, do a little narrow seam, and then turn it and do another seam so that you wind up with it looking like this, because I didn't want to see serging inside of little ruffles that are going around my wrist. So yeah, I did that kind of seam. Again, whatever that one is called. I also, before I did that, on the ones that are going to be the bottommost ruffles, as in like not the one with the band running across, but this one I serged around the top. The other ones I had serged it because initially I wasn't going to do that kind of seam, and then I did that seam, so I really didn't need to serge the little side parts of the seam. I did it anyway. But yeah, it's serged around the top here. The other type are not serged at all because they're going to be bias bound on both sides, but this is only getting bias bound on the one side. So now I'm going to apply the bias tape to that. By the way, I forgot to tell you that I made a buttload more of bias tape. So I have a ton here. Hopefully it's enough for everything, but I'm going to go now apply the bias tape to 2 sides of 2 of those and 1 side of the other 2 of those. And then once that is done, we will be able to pleat those into place. All right, I have just finished the binding on all of these pieces. So now I just get to pleat them up to fit the lower part of the sleeve and stitch them in place. And I can stitch them in place top stitching with the machine because it's going to be hidden by the band that I'm going to hand sew around them, which is the other bias band. I'm finding that using my little sleeve board for this is actually really, really helpful because I've already joined the ends together of these loops. Obviously, you can't press them flat on the table. So I'm using my tiny little ironing board and making my presses. I don't know if you can see, I think you can, the width of each press. So that's what makes this a 2-to-1 ratio instead of a 3-to-1 ratio like you would normally do where you're pleating back the full pleat. We're just pleating that little bit in there. And I'm just pinning these ones in the middle. The other ones I'm going to pin up at the top, but I'm still going to press them all the way across as well, because these will get secured underneath this one. So they'll both be secured around the middle. So yeah, just making all those pleats. You can see this one I've already done. The other thing that I'm being conscious of is pleating them in the opposite direction. So these pleats are going that way and these pleats are coming this way, just so that they can be mirrored to each other. So yeah, that's how these pleats are coming along. This one I already made sure it fitted exactly to the sleeve like I need it, and I did that by eyeballing. So the pleats, what's nice about them is that these little flowers, for the most part, they're kind of in, well, I guess this one's not. This one, it's being a lot more regular of where they are on the pleating, where on each pleat they lie. So it's kind of easy to see because I know how far from the pleat they need to go. So yeah, see, they're about equal distance. So yeah, I'm just going to finish pleating these up and then I'm going to sew them to the sleeves. So I have widened my bias strip a little bit. You can probably kind of see where it had been pressed to a 1-inch wide, but this is really meant to be 1.3 inches wide. And so the scale just looks a lot better with this wider on there. And then the other thing that I did was I just made this point. Now, because all of this is going to be hand sewn down really to like there, probably on the point, I didn't worry about the backside. So it's all raw edges in there. I literally just folded this over right sides together and then did 2 little lines and cut away the excess and turned it right side out. And this point is going to have a button just about there, totally decorative, but it's going to kind of finish off the sleeve there. And so I'm going to wind up doing that on the other one as well. This is just pinned in place right now. So I am going to go ahead. I made 2 little marks right here. I don't even know how well you can see those, but those little marks are basically how far apart the stitch lines will be on the machine. And so I'm just going to stitch on the machine there, and then that is going to get covered over by that. And that is how the sleeve decoration will go. So again, just pinned in place right now. I still have to pin the other ones in place as well, but we are proceeding apace. I've been thwarted. I had the realization that this end of the cuff was not going to fit over the free arm of my machine. So I was like, okay, let's do it backwards. Nope, that's it. The free arm of my machine will allow to this point on my sleeve. Everything else is too narrow for this free arm. And I'm just like, why do they make free arms so big? Because this shouldn't be that hard, but yet it is. So apparently I'm now going to have to do this by hand. If this were the very edge, like if I was putting the lace on or something, I could just kind of put the tiniest bit of it under here and have the rest of it sitting like here. But this is a good, 3-4 inches up the edge of the sleeve. So yeah, apparently I'm going to have to do all of this by hand. And it's going to be probably some big old ugly stitches, just like tacking them in place. But that's really obnoxious regardless. All right, my 2 layers of pleated trim here has been sewn down with giant stitches. I was doing a running back stitch, but with like 1/2-inch long stitches. So yeah, that's all set. Now I can hand stitch the one that goes on top. But actually, before I do that, I'm going to make the same sort of pleated trim as this double-sided one for the overskirt. I've just finished stitching my pleats on the overskirt in place. These are the pleats that go along the bottom ruffle of the overskirt. I'm still kind of thinking that I don't want to do a separate tier of this again up here. A, for time, and B, for visuals. I just don't think I like the visuals, but I want to be doubly sure of that. So now that I've sewn these on, which I was able to sew these with machine, which was great. So I just did 2 rows of stitching that are going to be hidden under the hand sewn bias strip here. But I'm going to go ahead and pin this bias strip on first and then put this back on the dress form so that I can make sure that I only like the one and wouldn't also like a second one, kind of up here-ish. So this is what it looks like right now, which looks super cute. And I'm just going to kind of like partially pin up the ruffle that I've already have made, which is actually sitting right there on the floor. I'm just going to pin that kind of in place to see what that would look like if we had a whole other tier of ruffles. So this is what it would look like with that second tier. And yeah, there's just something about it that feels off. I'm going to put the bodice on the top to see if that changes anything, but just looking at the skirt, it's like it's being eaten somehow, like it's turning it into a mouth. I don't know. I'm not liking it. Let's see if it makes any difference with the bodice. The bodice makes it a little better, but I still just feel like it becomes top heavy somehow with that extra ruffle in there. I think because there's no ruffle on the bottom of the skirt in the front. We do have all of the ruffles on the back. You can just barely see them over here, but yeah, I don't know. It just feels heavy somehow with that. Now that we have the bodice on, I should have put the bodice on in the first place. I'm going to take this back off and see if that rebalances, because right now I'm just not feeling it. Let's also take a quick look at it from the side before we take that off instead of just from the front, but I'm not feeling it right now. Well, complete with cat, here's what it looks like from the side. It is maybe a little bit better than it was from the front, but it just still feels like it's being interrupted by that layer instead of like having the nice graceful lines of the bustle dress, which is kind of what we want. So yeah, I'm going to take that off. It's just loosely pinned, and see if it goes back to normal, back to how I kind of liked it before without that on there. I am very much liking the pleated trim with the band of the bias, by the way. I think that does add a lot. I just feel like that kind of detracts. And I think the difference here is the fact that the plaid was originally supposed to be solid purple in the fashion plate. And so therefore we're breaking up that kind of just mass of purple, but the plaid is already visually interesting. And so now we're just adding like visual interest on visual interest, which gets it busy. So yeah, let's take that off, see if it gets better again. Yep, I think that decides it. That just looks so much cleaner without that middle ruffle on there. I think that is, almost our finished look. I have not pinned the band that goes around the cuffs right now, so that still has to get pinned and sewn into place. This obviously is just pinned. It is not sewn, so we've got a lot of hand sewing to do. There is one additional thing that I want to try, which is to zhuzh the bows a little bit, and I'm thinking about adding horsehair braid inside the bow loops to see if there's a way to hide that in there, but give that a little bit more stiffness, because although they are a little bit droopy in the fashion plate, you can see that right here, they're not that droopy. I like the concept. There's one issue with the horsehair braid I have in hand, which is it is way too wide for these bows. So I think I'm going to see if I can order some horsehair braid that would fit within this, like be a little bit smaller than the width, and see, because I do feel like having that zhuzhed out a little bit is just nicer. And I think that even if we literally just put it inside the bow, like not inside the layers of the bow, but where it is right now, where it's just kind of in there, I think that if we're able to put that in there with a couple of tacking stitches, that it's not actually going to be visible from the outside. And obviously this won't be best for packing for Ireland, but if I leave these pin-onable, not like this is a really messy pin because this one kept falling off at Port Townsend, so it was very haphazardly pinned. But if they are just pinned on, then the bows could be removed. Maybe I can even have a way to do the horsehair braid removable. And since I have to order it, I don't know that it'll get here for this video. We'll see, but I think it might be worth it to have some narrower horsehair braid on hand so that I can use it in other projects as well. So might as well get some of that for my stash and test it out to see if it will also do a good job for these bows. I just finished hand stitching the bias strip all around the skirt, and I also did the ones on the sleeves. And so now what's happening is that I had to pin back together the sides over here where they overlap, and I wanted to put it on the form to make sure that I'd pinned them correctly. But yeah, everything looks good here, so I can restitch like this section back together now on both sides. That's what I needed to undo in order to fit the trim into the overlapping. So once that is stitched back together, then this is largely done except for the bows. I did order some horsehair braid, so that should be here tomorrow. The question is whether it will get here before I really wanted to go out and take pictures in this, because tomorrow is one of only potentially 2 days that I can do that. So we'll see. And then there is also the question of like, do I just pin these on better to the skirt? Then, it's pinned right now, which is really loosey-goosey. Or do I stitch them? And I don't really want to make that decision until I add the horsehair braid. So here's me going along thinking that, okay, great, all I have left to do on this is do a couple of hooks and bars on the bow and also tack this side of the bow to the collar beneath, and the hooks and bars go on the other side of the bow, and just wait for the horsehair braid to arrive, which is supposed to arrive today. Well, first off, it's 7:15. The horsehair braid still hasn't arrived. So I'm glad that I hadn't planned to take the pictures today because I had thought about doing it. And I'm also glad that I didn't wind up doing that because while waiting for the horsehair braid, I sat down to edit this video and realized I never made the pockets. There's supposed to be the decorative pockets that go on the little like side peplumy bit of the bodice, and I forgot all about those in like this last week or so because this week has been insane, mostly because of work stuff, but it's just been insane. And the pockets were apparently driven completely from my mind. So clearly we need to make some pockets. So I've gone through and I've done the math about the scale for what these pockets should be. And now I'm trying to figure out how to put them together. So like when we look at the pockets, we can see that there is a little ruffled portion on the bottom, and the ruffle, the bottom of it, is bound with bias tape. Okay, that's a little bit confusing because it looks like a ruffle, but it's supposed to be a pocket. So like it's supposed to probably hold something and probably be fixed to the bodice somehow. So I have to figure that out because I'm not really sure about that. And then the top portion is like a little, I don't know what kind of geometry shape that is. I suppose technically if you turn it upside down, it's a pentagon. But we're turning it, it's an upside down pentagon. And so this is what I've created here. This is actually made on the fold, and I'm trying to do them so that they match each other and so that they're kind of centered on like the darker purple. Actually, yeah, this is the side I'm going to use. This side has a little white on it. And then the bottom of this is going to be folded up. The tops are going to be stitched actually right sides together and turned right side out. So we won't see the sides here because that's just seam allowance. We won't see the bottom because it's going to be folded up. And then somehow the ruffly part of the pocket is going to be like put underneath this. This is going to be like over the ruffly part, and the ruffly part is still a question mark. So there's a couple ways that we could go about doing this. We could put some other sort of pocket bag underneath the ruffle and have the ruffle just be like a top decoration. We could kind of forego the ruffle and stitch the bottom of the ruffle to the bodice itself, which would kind of create itself into a pocket bag, maybe like by pleating it slightly at the bottom. I'm not sure about that yet. Because I have things like the little bit of extra that I was going to start to use for the pleated part, you can see one pleat done, for the upper ruffle, or I also have like the ruffle itself. I don't have to bind anything new because I have stuff with binding. I just have to figure out how to actually make this into a ruffly pocket bag. This is too wide, so I'd be cutting off the top part of it, but it's like, yeah, I have to do some figuring out about how that's gonna work. And maybe I do just do like a decorative bag underneath it and have the ruffle kind of sitting on top of the pocket bag. It's a possibility, but I'm gonna do some experiments and see functionality wise what works best too. I mean, this is a pretty small pocket, so like this is gonna hold a chapstick or a credit card or like not a phone. It's not going to be that functional. I have the pockets in the skirt, so like those are functional pockets. And frankly, when I wore this last week, I didn't even wind up using those that much because I hadn't had pockets in the fairy godmother bustle, and so I kind of forgot that this one had pockets. Plus I had to go through the slit in the overskirt, the side slit, to get to the pocket, so they weren't the easiest to access. And then these are also going to be like in an awkward position because they're like back here, so these are largely decorative. Frankly, I could make them not even pockets. I could just do a ruffle with the little top part. But that's silly. Let's make functional pockets. So let's do some experimenting. So this is experiment number 1. I gathered up a little strip. This was 6.5 inches long, and it's basically 2 times, a little less than 2 times the length of that. And so I gathered that up. I folded in the edges over here, and I ran 2 gathering stitches up here, and then I ran an additional gathering stitch right here, basically along where I had stitched in the ditch, and just kind of have pinned that together at this point. And the idea, the gist of it, I think is right, like to be stitched down kind of along the sides there. Putting in this additional gathering stitch kind of helps to keep things contained. And so like this, the top would be stitched to the bottom, and then it would be stitched here to the bodice. However, I wound up increasing this size pretty significantly from the original. And so although I did my normal scale math on this, I think it doesn't work. Like, I think it just doesn't equate. Also, let's be honest, I can barely get like 3 fingers in here. Like that's going to be the least functional pocket that ever tried to be a pocket. So I think I'm going to do another test. Unfortunately, I had already made both of the tops, but I'm going to do another test with a wider top and a slightly bigger ruffle, because I think that if we look at the scale here, I think that would be a little bit better to just have a slightly bigger pocket. This is trial number 2, a slightly larger version. This is actually 5 inches across. And so this strip right here was 11 inches across because it's ×2 plus seam allowance. And at first I had just done a normal 1/2 inch seam allowance fold on either side. But to do that, then I had to ruche this bottom in a ton. And it just looked like I literally had a ruched band right here. So what I have done here is I have actually folded it in at a diagonal. So you can see that there's like probably about at least an inch right here, maybe even a little bit more, whereas it's like 1/2 inch up at the top. And same on the other side. And that means that it's able to be a little bit less ruched at the bottom. I wish that I could fold it in even more, but I think at a certain point it's gonna like not be able to fold flat. I haven't tried pressing this anew since I folded this in, but I think I'm going to try and fold it kind of as far as I can. But I do think this is a lot better. I don't know that it's exactly right. I feel like this maybe is too tall. So I'm thinking about trying to fold this up. Everything's just pinned. I'm trying to fold this up maybe a little bit more, like even 1/4 inch or 3/8 of an inch more, just to make this band a little bit shorter, because it's looking very heavy over here, and I feel like I don't want it to look quite that heavy. But overall, I think like width-wise in particular, I do think that this is a good size, though I do wonder, because it's so wide, it sits at quite a tilt. And I feel like anything that I do actually put in this pocket, now that it can actually hold a little bit more, I mean, still no phone, but still it can hold a bit more. I feel like it's all going to fall to here because this is basically where gravity would take things. Everything else is higher. So, I mean, it's a little funky, but let's be honest, it's still going to be a largely decorative pocket. Maybe I could put my handkerchief in there now that it's a little bit larger, but it is not the most functional. Yep, there we go. That looks way better. I reduced it by about 3/8 of an inch of height, and I think that that now no longer looks so heavy. I also did an actual press on these edges, which has also kind of helped to clean things up. So yeah, that looks like the pocket size that we want. I think the balance is good. I have the sleeve flipped up because otherwise it hides the pocket, but now you can see it with the sleeve down as well. I think that looks very nice. So now I just have to put all of the elements together. So this part right here is going to get hand whip stitched to the like pocket bag part. And then the rest of this, honestly, I think I'm going to machine sew, because I feel like hand whip stitching isn't going to be like secure enough for a pocket. I would prefer to hand stitch it just because it's going to look nicer. I don't know. I might experiment with some hand stitching and see if I can do that instead of machine stitching, because I do think that's going to look nicer. We also obviously have to make the same thing, the same dimensions on the other side as well. Well, my horsehair braid just arrived from Amazon, except this is not horsehair braid. This is cheap crap. Like, horsehair braid should not be able to do this. Just for context, the wide horsehair braid that I have is like this. Like, it's not moving. So obviously that's getting returned, which means that we're back to the, I don't know if horsehair braid will arrive in time for me to take these pictures because I can't get it locally, or maybe order it from Wawak or something more trustworthy. I've never actually ordered from Wawak. Like, I know that everyone talks about them, but they don't have free shipping. So it makes everything more expensive. But I might look at what they have, because I'm just kind of worried that if I order a different lot on Amazon, that it's just going to be this crappy faux nothing again. Like, this doesn't even have the stuff that you pull, the thread. Like, this has a little thread at the top so that you can narrow one edge compared to the other, and that doesn't have that. And I'm pretty sure all horsehair braid is supposed to have that. So yeah, don't order the listing called this from Amazon. It's not good. It is not even horsehair braid. That's disappointing. So I did not wind up ordering the horsehair braid yet. And I'm going to be taking pictures tomorrow of the finished look. And I say the finished look because, look, we have pockets. They're so cute, and they are large enough that I think they're actually at least somewhat functional. So that will be really, really good. There's one on each side And I am still in the process of sewing the last couple of hooks and bars onto this bow, but I have sewn it in place on the collar on this side, and I just literally need to add at least one bar over here, maybe one additional hook and bar, but I think only one's gonna be the answer there. So almost done, and I will show you what the complete look looks like tomorrow. And I may at some point in the future add horsehair braid to those bows because I do want them to be a little less floppy, but obviously not when I don't have the braid. So that is it for this bustle gown project. Finally finished. I do still want to add the horsehair braid into the bows because I do think that they look just too floppy right now, especially now that I've added the rest of the trims. It's almost like more glaringly floppy. So I do plan to do that before Ireland. Frankly, what I'm hoping that I will be able to do is to cut pieces that I need of the horsehair braid, and when I get to Ireland, literally just stick them inside the bows. Maybe do a couple of tacking stitches, but that way I don't have to pack them already in the bows because that is going to be really obnoxious to pack. But if they are just flat in the suitcase, like 4 little pieces of flat horsehair braid, that shouldn't be too bad. So hopefully I will find a source for that. I might just wait until I can get like $99 worth of a Wawak order. I think I'm at about like $70 worth right now. So I might just get a little bit more so that I can order the horsehair braid without also shelling out an extra $6 for shipping. But I'm really pleased with how the dress looks overall. I do think that adding the pockets, adding especially the sleeve trim, and adding the extra pleats on the skirt, it does make a really big difference. The sleeve trim in particular, it just looked unfinished before. Because it was, and now it looks more finished. Like, this is how a Victorian sleeve looks as opposed to what it was before when it just had a little bit of eyelet lace. So yeah, very, very nice. I'm very happy with it. I'm also really glad that we didn't need that extra row of the ruffles and trim. It would have just looked silly, frankly. If it had been solid, I think it would have worked fine, but with the plaid, it would have just looked silly. So hopefully you are as glad as I am that I actually stuck through this and finished it off, because let me tell you, it was kind of a hard slog. It's hard to do things when you no longer have like a deadline or a real reason to do them. My reason was you. And luckily that worked, because otherwise it never would have actually gotten finished, I think, or at least certainly not right now. So thank you very much for sticking it out with me while I stuck it out with you. Also, just as a heads up, if you are curious about how I do my hair for this sort of thing, in case you missed it, because I feel like YouTube hasn't really been showing it to people, I just this last week posted a hair tutorial on how I do this hairstyle. So I will link that short down in the description below, but I do try to post shorts. Not every week, but as much as I kind of can that would be helpful to you, so definitely go check that out. But if you enjoyed this video, please go ahead and click the thumbs up icon. And if you'd like to see more videos like this from me, please go ahead and click subscribe and the little bell icon to be notified every time I post a new video. I do post videos here on YouTube at least once a week, usually with sewing vlogs like this out on Tuesdays, and sometimes with additional costuming or sewing related content, especially shorts, out on Saturdays. But I post every day over on my Instagram, so please go follow me on Instagram. That's at Lady Rebecca Fashions. And if you'd like to help support all of the work that I do on this channel, I do have a link to my Patreon and my Ko-fi down in the description below, or you can send me a super thanks or join my YouTube channel memberships right here on YouTube below the video. I'd also like to give a special shout out to my Edwardian level patrons, Jean and Kim. Thank you all so much for joining me today. I hope you all have a wonderful week, and I will see you very soon in my next video. Happy sewing!